I can be whatever, you can be whatever. The most important thing is that we're talking and understanding what your legal needs and what your legal issues are, and making sure that your documents are protecting you.
Welcome to another edition of the NiceJob Podcast. If you like what you hear, please give this video a like and subscribe to get new content first. As always, these are just the highlights of our episode. For the full conversation, head to our podcast platforms. All right, let's see who our guest is today.
Hi, I'm Cory Sterling. Get excited because we're going to talk about proactive law versus reactive law and how we can keep you totally protected.
Welcome everybody in to another edition of the NiceJob Podcast. Thank you so much for being here. And if you're here for the very first time, guess what? You're in the right spot. We're going to help you out today. We're going to make you a better business owner and make you a better person, because if you're really improving a lot of aspects of your life, you'll see there's a lot more crossover and synergy. And the guest I have today was actually referred to us by a couple of podcast guests that we had on a bit earlier, or podcast appearances that I had made out. And the one thing they told me is they said, Sean, you're going to love this individual because he leads with his heart. In fact, he's the heart-leading lawyer. But also, he embraces fun. And if you've listened to this podcast, you know that I embrace fun. You should have fun at work. You need to have fun in everything you do. Fun is not a childish thing. And so to have a little fun with me and to have a little discussion about the law and wherever else we end up going, please let me welcome Cory Sterling. Cory, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us on the NiceJob Podcast.
Sean, thank you for having me. And I'm here basically because of our mutual commitment for fun.
Yeah, and I want to actually start there. Fun in particular, I'm a big advocate of it, but sometimes you say it to certain individuals, they tend to, like I said, think of it as a childish sort of thing. So my question for you is, how do you define fun in a way that helps you make sense of it, of why it should be in every element of your life?
I think fun is a feeling that doesn't really fit into any specific circumstance. So I couldn't say like doing X activity to me is fun, but I think fun is more the unique approach that you bring to a situation. So you're doing something that maybe you don't want to be doing, and you think, well, like, I can make this fun. And you think about the different elements of doing that particular activity that are fun. Obviously, some things like, I would imagine when you say fun, like I just think of being on a roller coaster, like that would be the traditional fun thing to do. Or eating popcorn, if you're a popcorn eater, like that sounds fun. Like there's a large quantity, I get to eat it for a long period of time. It's really tasty. So those things are fun. But to me, fun much more so is a mentality choice of just saying like, oh, cool, like I can find a way to make anything that I'm doing fun, and I can choose fun. So that's sort of why I built my law firm around, making law fun, because A, no one else is doing it. And B, if I'm going to spend a lot of time doing it, I might as well be having fun.
And it's interesting because I talked about, you're the heart-leading lawyer, and you deal with a lot of fun. And some people might look at that situation and say, this seems like an opposite situation. Because when I think of lawyer, when I close my eyes, I'm thinking of this stuffiness and almost, just based on sometimes how the law plays out, this overarching procedural sort of industry, right? Because even just, some law things, you're filing briefs and like, it just gets so structured and things like that. How did you find your calling to bring your energy into this profession? Was it something that, you at first you were kind of doing it and then you decided to make it fun? Was it you were always, heart leading and always fun, and it just happened that the law came a part of it? How did this all come together to create what we're seeing now?
It came together. It started off with a vast experience of contrast, where I'd worked in a big law firm and I'd worked in a small law firm, and I was just like, there's no fun going on here, basically. No one's having fun. The lawyers aren't having fun. The clients aren't having fun. And I was very, very, very close to hanging up the skates as being a lawyer and just calling it quits and waiting for them to raise my jersey to the banners and just say, Cory Sterling made it 2 years into being a lawyer. But I was pretty upset at that prospect because I had studied for so long and worked so hard to get there that I just sort of, in a sort of Rudy Rudiger last ditch sort of effort, was like, well, what if I just created it my own way and came up, and the guiding light to me always has been, I want to be the lawyer for others that I would want to have myself. So like, hey, if I needed a lawyer, what would their attitude be like? How would the process work? How would I enjoy speaking to them? All those sorts of things. And I basically, that plus my passion for travel, I was at a point where I was ready to stop being a lawyer, and I was like, okay, well, I'm going to design my legal practice so that I'm only doing things online. This was in 2017. I'm only doing things online so that I can do it from anywhere. I'm not going to do any filings. I'm not going to do any injunctions. I'm not going to do anything that involves me physically needing to be present. And why don't I just try to be the lawyer that I think should exist out there in the world? And so I started traveling for almost 5 years ago. And and it stuck. And it was, in a lot of ways, it was very much by design at the start, where I was like, I will do this, I will not do that. And that's because I had the travel element to it. And then over time, I've just continued to refine that and refine that and refine that. And now growing a team, I get to choose more and more of what I do and what I don't do. So it's been a bit of a mix of both. And then the hard leading part came in was just because all of my clients are people doing awesome things. And I again, coming back to contrast, when I started in my young career as being a lawyer, all of my clients sucked and just weren't, they were big corporations that were heavily profit driven. No one was really making the world a better place. And to me, heart leading means that you're doing what you're passionate about. You're doing what you feel is your contribution to the world. And as much as I want to help those people, I also want to be a lawyer for those people.
I feel that when they hear that answer, they will probably be inspired to okay, yes, that's the type of lawyer I want. But there's a small percentage that goes, yeah, but I don't need a lawyer. Like, no one's suing me. I'm not in any litigation or anything like that. But as far as I know, there's plenty of things when setting up a business and kind of as your business starts to grow and scale and things like that, there's kind of a need, or perhaps it would be a little bit easier or smoother to kind of have some legal guidance in that regard. Is there something that you think either business owners or individuals that are kind of going down the entrepreneurial path, if there's something that maybe they overlook or try to take on themselves that really could benefit from a legal touch?
Yeah, definitely. The way that you always want to think about law, and I just first want to address your first point of do I really need a lawyer? And the answer, lawyers, I always see lawyers and seatbelts being the same. Okay. So let me ask you, do you really need a seatbelt?
I'm a big proponent of seatbelts, but could I operate the vehicle without it? I guess technically, would I choose to? No.
But it is possible that you could drive your entire life not wearing a seatbelt and not have an issue and not have a problem. But I see working with lawyers and having legal documents drafted by a professional who understands you and your business and your industry. It's like a seatbelt where it's you don't need it until you do, but when you do need it, it's going to save your business. And so what I would say is if the question is, do I need a lawyer? I would just respond by saying, do you need a seatbelt? And I've been through this. I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of clients all over the world, and there's always two types of problems. One is a proactive problem, and one's a reactive problem. And proactive is hey, I'm starting my business out, or I'm going to start working with strangers, or I'm going to start building a team, and I want to be proactive and protect myself and make sure I'm classifying workers properly and make sure that I have good service agreements with my clients and make sure I have a good waiver of liability so I don't get sued. And that's being proactive. That's before a problem has come up, you're addressing the need to deal with it professionally. Conversely, there's reactive, which is when you're in the car accident not wearing a seatbelt, and then you need to fix the problem. And I'd say my practice is probably a 50-50 split between the two, where half the times I'm protecting people so they don't run into a problem, and I know what they need to avoid those problems. But then half the time it's someone coming to me who's in a big problem and, didn't protect their trade secrets, or, was calling someone a contractor but treating them like an employee. Now there's an audit. Choose the random scenario of things gone wrong, and I've been part of it. And so my answer is that, it's very sensible to make sure that you have legal documents in place. It helps you protect your assets. It helps you have the best types of relationships. And it also avoids that, it gives you the confidence so that you can go out and build it and take it to the next level without thinking like, do I have the structure in place? But it also avoids the stress and the challenges that can, spontaneously arise out of nowhere that derail all of your efforts and are extremely not fun and stressful and time consuming and expensive.
And the seatbelt analogy is definitely apt because you can trust your driving skill and you can trust your training and all that, but it's just that extra little protection. It's almost a seatbelt, something you hope you don't ever really have to, fully rely on, but you're gonna be glad it's there when it comes. And so building trust, obviously we're in the reputation marketing space. We're a big, advocate for that in particular. And you talked about having service agreements and employee contracts, things like that. Having those kind of set for your business helps you a little bit more. But this is very much a community, the entrepreneurial community, that does help one another, that works in conjunction. And I see a lot of just sharing a generic service agreement, or just sharing in Facebook groups like, oh, this is the employment contract I use, just slap your business name on it. I would feel it's almost like such a basic question, but like the more you're kind of specializing, the more you're diving in, the better coverage you're going to get. That may lead to someone going, well, shouldn't I be in someone's office? Shouldn't it be a face-to-face? Like, how do I really do this virtually? If that's what, Cory, you kind of said, like, hey, you moved your business to be able to travel around, is how do I go into that sort of relationship? What should I be looking for? Or what are some indicators that I'm going to be able to get this handled from the virtual sense when it comes to the law?
I think the greatest benefit to it, in addition to why I built this just traveling, which was like completely hedonistic at the start. I was like, I don't ever want to stop traveling, so if I can be a lawyer at the same time, that's great. But I just saw, like, when I was a lawyer, it just seemed so inefficient that everyone had to get dressed up because it was a lawyer's office. So like, they'd get dressed up, they'd drive downtown, they'd pay for parking, they'd be stressed, they'd be rushed, all these things. And I think the coolest thing about it now is, I can be whatever, you can be whatever. The most important thing is that we're talking and understanding what your legal needs and what your legal issues are, and making sure that your documents are protecting you. So I think if someone's looking to get into that relationship, the most important thing is working with a lawyer who you believe in, whose mission you believe in, and someone who has a reputation working in your industry and understands your industry. And just that even little example of sharing employment agreements through a Facebook group. I can't tell you how many times I've been hired by someone who has a problem with an employee, who has an issue, and I'll ask them to send me a copy of the document. And I'm like, this doesn't even relate to you or your business. Why did you sign this agreement? And I think on that same note, the really thing to be considerate of is when you're signing a document, you're making a legal promise. Like, it's if you're a sole proprietor, you are personally liable for every extent of that agreement. And if you're signing on behalf of your LLC or your company's responsible for that. And I think people don't accept the grave nature of signing away legal rights to something that you don't understand. And I think it's something that, again, I understand because I get it. Like, before I was a lawyer, none of this would ever cross my mind. I used to work in professional sports. I worked in the NFL. I traveled. I worked in the Middle East. I did all these things. And I never once thought about legal agreements. But once you just hear and go through enough experiences and stories, you realize the importance of having something that's specific to your business and working with someone who can help you achieve your goals through your legal agreements.
So what does that, process start to look like? All right. So say I'm going to hire you kind of in the virtual sense. Is it a series of calls back and forth? Is it kind of like this discovery from your end, figure out what we're about, and then figure out what we need? Like, because sometimes we get these questions into our podcast inbox, things like that are like, oh, that guy talked about this. Like, where do I start? It's the most like bare bone question. So if someone's looking, they're going to hire you kind of as a virtual lawyer and things like that. Does it have to start with like, all right, well, I know I need an employee agreement, or can it just start with, hey, a consultation? Can you tell me what I need?
Yeah, we always, so anyone who's listening who, if any of this resonates or it's time for you to, circle back on your legal or get started or be at best practices, well, I'm sure you'll include my email address in the show notes so people will be able to reach out. And I'll do 10-minute consultation calls with anyone. And the cool thing is I've done thousands. I've done this for 5 years. So it's very easy for me to understand rather quickly what it is that you're doing, what the main areas of exposure to liability and risk that you have are, and come up with a game plan. And it's as simple as like our typical flow would be a conversation. We would send out a proposal with a link to get started. You'd answer questions. In a week, we send you documents that are customized to you. We hop on a call to make sure you understand the documents, and then we're there for ongoing support. And that's really as simple as it looks.
Another element I believe that you guys handle, and if I'm mistaken, I apologize for that, but we have a couple entrepreneurs out there that might... they're working on their branding, or they're working on their technology, and sometimes they get in a situation where they're trying to figure out of how much protection do they need on their brand. They're talking about like trademarking and things like that, or even like procedural. Some people want to protect their process or try to almost brand like this is how we do it and kind of build it forward. In that sort of sense, when you're talking about either like copyrights or trademarks or things like that, I'm always intrigued by that process, because it seems like it should be a quick thing, but I almost feel like I would want it to be this quick thing, but it also feels like, how in the world could I think that the one thing I developed is actually just me? So I guess the general question in that one in particular is, if someone's looking to take their brand and really start to make it their own, is there some things they need to do earlier in the process before they get to the point of like, oh man, I probably should have trademarked this?
Yeah, the first things that you'd want to do is you'd want to register the business under a business name, that's not the same as a trademark, but it gives you some sort of claim, because the way that it works with trademarks is that it's always the person who has the best rights in something is the person who's been using it the longest, but also the person who can prove that they've been using it the longest. So even, and I want to answer your question specifically before I sort of go into a tangent about trademark and copyright, but what I would say is probably the first thing to do when choosing a business name or registering a business is like having a look at what else is out there. And that could mean going to the US Patent and Trademark Office website and seeing if there's a registered trademark with that name. It could mean applying in your state or province for, an LLC or a corporation name and seeing if the government approves it. If there's a competing name that's, very similar, they don't approve, there's a name approval process. So those are sort of like two official, semi-official ways to do it. But what I would say is like, if the question is, when is it worthwhile for me to invest in protecting my intellectual property? Mm-hmm. And by this, I would mean like, a written process, a training program, or your logo or the brand name of your business and what you're using. The answer is like the moment that you know that you're going to be, it's like the moment that you know that you're committed to it. And that's like, because sometimes at the beginning you're like, I sort of like this name and I sort of like this name and all these different things, right? Like that's going to happen. But when the moment you're like, boom, I'm going with this. Like, so for me in Conscious Counsel, even before I got one client, I loved the name, I love what it stood for, and I registered for a trademark. Like I did the necessary requirements to file it as like active use, but that was because I loved it. It was everything that I wanted, and I knew that I was always going to use it. And so if what I'd say to anyone who's listening is, if you have a business name or a slogan or a logo that you're committed to, that you've got the domains, you've got all of these things ready, the time to trademark is now, because in the same way that I've had clients who have had issues because they didn't have the right agreements in place, I have a lot of clients who, and I'm just wrapping something up now, really cool sunglass company. We're using a name that exists to another sunglass company, and they got a cease and desist letter. They'd spent thousands of dollars marketing and building a whole brand around it, and they've had to change 100% of it. And it sucks to go through that. And the only thing that I say to them is like, I wish we had an opportunity to work together sooner, so that that we could have protected you and that you could enjoy the investment and goodwill that you've made.
Yeah, and it's I never really thought about when you're going to be committed to it, because it's also, if you find out like, okay, you believe you're committed to it, but you go through the process and find out someone else has it, it prevents that story that you just told, right? It prevents you from now being so ingrained, you've made it everything that you are because you fell in love with this, but it was nothing. It was something that you really couldn't ever have, right? Because if someone else had already kind of, filed that trademark or had that branding and forced you to kind of shift. So, yeah. And also the other way around, some people never really commit to anything, right? And so not having to go through the process over and over and over again, if we're going to make constant changes. I never really thought about it, thinking it in that regard, but it makes a lot of sense.
I always call it the marriage test. It's sort of like if you think about marriage, and marriage is the highest level of commitment that you can make in a relationship. It's sort of like your business marriage to that name or logo. When you know it's the one, and that you want to stay with it, and that you're going to use it to have and to hold, that's the time to register.
You mentioned earlier about an email address, but this is the point of the show where if anyone has been listening to this and they're like, I want to connect with Cory, I want to learn more, or just see what's going on, where should we direct them towards?
Yeah, you can find us on Instagram, Conscious Counsel. My email address is cory@consciouscounsel.ca. And you can just visit our website, Conscious Counsel, and say a note, drop a note, say hi. Even if you just want to connect, I'm happy to speak to wonderful people always, and I look forward to it.
Nice. And we will have those down in the show notes in the description. I have a feeling when I edit it, I probably put them on screen as well. So yeah, connect with Cory. But Cory, it's been my pleasure to connect with you so far. And a lot of listeners, when they like a guest, they'll tell me to bring them back for a part 2. And I have a feeling that my inbox is going to have a bunch of those messages. So thank you once again for taking time out of your day to join us on the Nice Job Podcast.
Cheers, Sean. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks so much for checking out the video. Remember, you can listen to the full episode of our podcast on Spotify, iTunes, Buzzsprout, or wherever you get your podcasts. Here on YouTube, I want to invite you to subscribe by clicking right there, or you can check out 2 other videos. One, our most recent podcast, and the other to learn a little bit more about NiceJob. So click one of those things, and I can go home.